Hello and welcome to this chat we're having with musicians of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. My name is Otto Tausk, I'm the music director, and with me from my left to right is first of all Henry Shepard, the principal cellist of the orchestra. Next to Henry we have Cassandra Beckery from the violin section and Karina Vincenti, also a violinist. And if you go to the right bottom, for me that is Jenny Jonquil, the principal clarinetist, and also the, if I say that correctly, Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, the chair of the Chamber Music Committee.
We don't technically have a chair, but I've de facto this year a little bit. I'm the chair, but not, we don't have a chair.
You're kind of a chair, but without actually having the chair title there. So, well, it's wonderful to have this chat about chamber music, especially now, of course, we've been playing a lot of chamber music. Forced by the pandemic, we started this season with smaller ensembles, and that grew, and we're still growing, and we're very positive about the future. But even though we had these restrictions in the pandemic season, we had a lot of great things going on, and one of those great things was chamber music. Now, in a normal season, the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, maybe, what is it, Jenny, 3 or 4 programs a season with chamber music?
Yes, about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, our former concertmaster, Dale Bartok, started the VSO Chamber Players series. And his idea was to have this series that was curated by the musicians and completely run by us. So we've been doing that all along, and it's usually 4 concerts a season. Sometimes we've had extra concerts in with kind of festivals or things like that. But it's been it's a big highlight of my season every year, you know, and people love playing on it. And it's, you know, groups that we want to perform with, and the musicians will submit their ideas of pieces they'd like to play with a group they want to play with. And then we'll try to create some interesting programs around that. And we have a great following, you know, our loyal chamber music fans that we love. And hopefully this being on the digital concert hall with some of our chamber music can expand that.
Well, exactly. Well, we'll talk about the fun and the interesting parts of chamber music later on. And we'll also have the opportunity for some questions that we will try to answer. So maybe in half an hour or so, if you have some questions for us, please send them to us, and we can chat about that. So in this season, we've almost finished now. There's been a lot of chamber music, and a lot of those performances are actually now presented on the concerthall.ca, on YouTube, on Facebook, in what we actually now call the Chamber Music Fest. I'm already starting to change into German, because fest, of course, is such a German word for me. So I'm talking about Musik, but of course it's Chamber Music Fest. And it's with chamber music that the VSO musicians have, well, I think what we've recorded all season, isn't it?
Yeah, we've been doing chamber music throughout this season. So the pieces that are being released today are things, for instance, the Nielsen Quintet that came out today was recorded back in November. So that we've kind of been collecting these, and now they're being released as this for ChamberFest, which is exciting. And it's interesting because a lot of what
is great.
Yeah, a lot of what we've been forced to do because of the pandemic has been, you know, we can't play large orchestra work. So as much as we've tried to present the full orchestra, we've also done some smaller things in the regular VSO outside of ChamberFest. We've done some things that could qualify as chamber music, which is really exciting. And I think it's a great way for the musicians to kind of grow and work together in a different way than they usually do.
Well, I think what you just said right now is a very, very interesting thing, as is actually that the let's say the symphonic music and the chamber music somehow starts to flow more into each other, as well as for the musicians, but also, of course, for the audience. We're extremely lucky as a Vancouver Symphony Orchestra to have the concerthall.ca. It is presented by TELUS, and it not only presents the symphonic works, but also now, of course, the chamber music works. I've always been a huge fan of chamber music. First of all, just to play. I mean, it's for me, it was the best part of when I studied the violin many years ago. I lived in a student house with all musicians, and very often we would not only have some pasta together, but also play the Brahms quartets or the Mozart clarinet quintets or whatever. The Brahms, the clarinet quintet is so beautiful, and I really remember nights and nights of just wanting to play that gorgeous music again. So I know for a lot of composers, chamber music is also the, let's say, the high point of what they're writing, what they've written, and what they want to say in music can be so detailed and so refined in chamber music. So it's really it's a special category, the chamber music. Now, in finding the chamber music that's suitable for you or for musicians in the orchestra, how does that actually work? Is it just, do you just pick the works that you think are most beautiful, or do you first find the people together, or how does that work?
It depends, and I think it varies group to group. Actually, I'd love to hear from the other people who've submitted some things for next season. Usually, well, actually, I'd say 50-50. Sometimes it's just people you want to work with, and you find beautiful works that, fill that ensemble. But I think also there are some pieces, like you mentioned, the Brahms is also my favorite piece of all time. So yeah, I'm constantly asking to do that with everyone. Anyway,
right.
Cassie, what about you when you submit? How are you coming up with your ideas?
I think a lot of what you said is pretty much it. I mean, there are pieces that we come back to again and again because we love them so much, like a good book. And then there's also, sometimes something that you just never really got the chance to sink your teeth into. A lot of the times when we're, in school or in a festival, we do a piece, a great piece, really, really fast. And we just wish we had more time, another chance to do it. A second round can really change it. And so I think, I can remember some of the things that I maybe submitted for next year. And I'm not sure which of these I actually went through, but they're all pieces that I've been playing a lot of quartets with the three women that I played the Shaw with in the ChamberFest. And we often will read stuff, and there's like some programs that we kind of dream up, like, oh, wouldn't this go really well with that? I've always wanted to play this. And in kind of dreaming that up, we kind of came to some pieces that some of us had never played, some of us had played many times, but like Jenny said, we just want to play them again. And it's different every time, but also you kind of get to know it on a more intimate level. So what did we submit? I think there was late Beethoven. Was it 132? I can't remember. Jenny, do you remember? Did we submit Beethoven 132?
And a Bartok.
Oh, Bartok 6, of course, which I've played, oh my gosh, so many times. And every time I'm like, okay, I want just one more time. Every time I'm like, I need to do it again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, it's so exciting to get to connect. Sorry, my cat's like causing mayhem behind the camera. I'm sitting here trying to keep a straight face. But it's just like really amazing to get to connect with everybody in that like really close kind of level, like really work together closely like that. And so much more of our individual personalities get to come out. So it's super fun. Yeah, it's hard to pick pieces, but there are so many favorites. It depends, I guess, what everybody's in the mood for that year.
I find it's great that you mix up Beethoven and Bartok, and I find that really interesting because the Beethoven quartets and the Bartok quartets, they have a lot. For me, they have a lot in common. Actually, the way Beethoven, the way Bartok is actually treating themes and actually thinking about music and presenting it is very similar in the way Bartok does that. And I've always found that. In the approach as a musician, you kind of look at them in the same way. They're very challenging, but also very rewarding. And I find there's an incredible line through music history, which becomes really clear in chamber music. There's a lot of chamber music that's I think music in general started off as chamber music, just people sitting together and singing or playing an instrument in small groups. I think it's the origin of music is chamber music, and what we now know as the symphony orchestra is something that grew out of that, which I think is an interesting concept, because the chamber music aspect has always been there, and the let's say the development of music history is so clear in chamber music. And you can also find that, for instance, the Bartok quartets, they have so much folk music inside. And if you look at the music that's written not only by Bartok, but by a lot of other composers around that time, suddenly they all come up with folk music and folk tunes and folk rhythms. And again, chamber music is a highly condensed form where that actually kind of explodes. Well, let me stop talking about that now. What really interests me is also how do you feel making chamber music with colleagues, especially from the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, of course, but just colleagues from like orchestral musicians, which we all, or you all are orchestral musicians, and chamber music players. How does that actually differ, or how does that influence each other, or maybe even how is that beneficial to play chamber music and then go back to the symphony orchestra, or the other way around, playing a Beethoven symphony and then looking at his string quartets? So Karina or Henry, maybe you have some ideas on this.
Well, first of all, Beethoven string quartets are my favorite. I'm not unique in that, but in college, anytime we had a free night, we would, open a bottle of wine, read through all of them. So, those are just so deeply ingrained. And I think playing the symphonies and playing the quartets is not a whole lot different for me. I feel like it's all rewarding, and wherever you are in this seated in the symphony, I always try to look at where that circle is. Say I'm in the back of the seconds. I always try to see, okay, which cellist is in this line, and try to play off of them. Of course, you want to look at your principal players, but we're all chamber musicians in the symphony. That's the one thing that I think, just because they have different.
So what you're describing is, I find that fascinating, because I never realized that, is that you actually, when you play in the orchestra, you're looking for your chamber music friends.
Yeah.
But you're not only just treating all the musicians in the orchestra as a let's say as a chamber group, but you're actually focusing on some of them.
Yeah. And it's pretty, I don't know, it's not to get too sentimental, but it's the one thing I really love about symphonic ensemble playing is that you get to connect with, upwards of 100 people, right? If you're playing Mahler. And as an introvert, that is very intense, and there are no words that need to be spoken, and that connection with the universal language that is music is why we do it, right? So it's fantastic. And chamber music, the only thing it's just a little bit more intimate, because it's 3 people to 5 people to 9 people, and it's equally as enjoyable. And maybe you're a little more nervous because you're more exposed. You don't have a whole section to support you if you're in a string section. Yeah, it's all enjoyable.
It's more exposed, and it's also more. Sorry, Henry, I interrupted you, I think.
Oh,
No, I was thinking on your line of your thought, Karina. Here is that it's more exposed. It's with a smaller group, which is challenging. It's rewarding, but it's also challenging. But it's also more, let's say, when you do a rehearsal with a chamber music ensemble, you're going to have to talk to each other. You're going to have to say, oh, I think this would be nice to do this way, and why don't we try it that way? So it becomes more of a dialogue, not only in playing, but also in rehearsing. It's the process of starting off with a piece, with a string quartet or a wind ensemble or whatever, or maybe one of my favorite pieces, the Brahms horn trio. It's a fantastic piece, but there's always the problem that the horn is, well, it's pretty strong compared to the violin, of course, in volume. And even if all the members of the ensemble are very aware of that problem, you still have to talk about it, and you still have to find solutions for that. So do you have some thoughts on that, or examples or ideas? Because it's much more a direct and personal way of making music.
I wonder, Otto, if there's sort of, and this is to Karina's point too about string quartets specifically, but also small scale chamber music, which is that when a composer writes for only a couple of instruments, and this is like a symphonic composer, so Beethoven, Brahms, they have to be much more imaginative because their instrumentation is very limited. And an example that often comes up in the cello repertoire is the Brahms F major cello sonata, which has a number of similarities to Brahms F major symphony, the Third Symphony. So ultimately, if you're a cellist and a pianist, in rehearsal, in dialogue, the way that you describe, you end up having to answer questions like, well, what does forte mean if it's only two instruments? Could this, if you were imagining scoring this for an orchestra, would you hear it as horns? Would you hear it as woodwinds? Would you hear it as strings? And how would that adjust the quality?
So what you're doing now is you're actually translating the chamber music, cello and a piano, to a symphonic color.
Right. Well, because one imagines that, the composer would have had perhaps a broader scope of sound in their head than they would use for even a couple instruments. I mean, to your point about Bartok, one of my favorite Bartok works is for solo piano. It's the Mikrokosmos, the 6 books that go from like one note all the way up to these incredibly complex pieces. But one instrument like the piano, two instruments like sonatas, the horn trio, the string quartet as a form, again, you're so limited that you would imagine that with certain harmonies and certain techniques, you can achieve as vast a imaginative landscape as you could with an orchestra. And I think that's why that rehearsal process becomes so fulfilling, because you have so many stones to turn over.
Yeah. And so how does the rehearsal process look like? Is it I imagine it is, but it's very different from the rehearsal process of a week with the symphony orchestra. With the symphony orchestra, you start on Tuesday, you work for 3 days, then you give 2 or 3 concerts, and then you move on to the next thing. So how does that work when you work with a string quartet or with a clarinet quintet? How does that work? It must be very different.
I'd say that it feels much more detailed in the sense that when you're with the orchestra, the conductor is the one who's making these overarching artistic decisions and who has decided what he wants to do with the music and where he wants each phrase to lead. And when you're doing chamber music, you're making those decisions as a group. So there's a lot of conversation about how you see the phrasing and how you're interpreting different things. So in that sense, it feels so much more personal. And I feel like you get to know the individual musicians on a different level than playing in the orchestra. So even this Mozart quintet that we've been rehearsing, Henry and Karina are both in the group with me. And I didn't know Karina really at all before. And it's so nice. And Henry's new. And it's been really great to get to know them through this piece, to get to know them as musicians and people. So I think that a lot of times people see chamber music and orchestral music as 2 separate things. And there are chamber musicians and orchestral musicians. And I think that's kind of nonsense in a way. An orchestra is just a large chamber group, especially with a great conductor. You're playing like a chamber orchestra would. And so when we kind of go off into these ensembles, like I've been playing with Tim for years. He's playing violin in the Mozart. I know how to follow Tim in the same way I would if we played in a group week to week together. I'm interested, Cassie, in your perspective on this, because you play in kind of a preformed quartet. You guys play together all the time, and you've also played chamber music with others of us from the VSO. So you have kind of both sides of it. I've played in a woodwind quintet that did, years ago, a bunch of competitions, memorized all our music. They were very gung ho. So I know what that is like for me versus what I'm doing here. And honestly, I wouldn't say that being in the preformed group is like is better in any way. You know, the groups that we put together here, we know each other really well. We know each other's playing, and I don't know. I don't find it to be such a different thing, I guess. But I'm curious from you.
Oh, I would agree completely. I definitely feel like it's such a treat to play chamber music with everyone who you get to work with so closely in the symphony. I mean, something that one of my favorite parts of playing in the section, period, is working with your stand partner, which is essentially a teeny group inside the larger group. Over the years, over the weeks, even you know, normally we rotate and you get to know different people, and you get better and better at knowing that person really well. And it's so cool that you do this without speaking. Something that I find, we've talked a lot about the similarities between chamber music and symphony, but there's something that's really different, and it makes it so fun, I think, to get to know people in both groups, not because the symphony isn't a large chamber group, but just because of the roles we play, especially I think speaking as like a violin section player, you know, our whole MO is like, how little ego can you have? Because the more you work for the collection, the better you sound, the more you put aside what you personally think your voice has to say today. And the more you go for a larger idea, the better the section sounds. And yet in chamber music, you are the section. So something so amazing to me is when I've gotten the chance to play with different members of the string section, particularly because you realize how incredible that skill is to play together. The more you hear, like, every single person in this orchestra has a gorgeous individual voice, and it is unique, and yet we can kind of combine those to be something like a third thing, a thing that is all of us unified. So I don't know, I find it helps so much to get to know people and their styles. You also get to be able to support them and be supported. You know, everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, and I love that my colleagues know me so well. You know, it makes me feel really like supported and safe on stage, just because I know they know like all my quirks and the things I like and the things that make me nervous, you know? So it enhances everything to be able to do both. Even though they're so similar, they bring different things to the table.
Well, that's beautiful. I really love the way the making chamber music is a more personal way of getting to know your colleagues, actually, that you work with every day, the entire season. I'm just thinking about chamber music in general, that the idea of chamber music is very often seen as, oh, it's intellectual, it's difficult, you have to sit down and be really quiet and concentrate to enjoy chamber music, which of course in a way is true. It's so specific and so detailed that not only preparing it and performing it, but also listening to it, it can go really deep. It can go into very deep layers of your, let's say, of your, can I say, consciousness or awareness or experience of music. But at the same time, I remember that I think I started off listening to chamber music without knowing much about it and enjoying it immediately. So how can we help our audience? How can we invite our audience to, let's say, not be scared of chamber music, because it hasn't what's the word? It has maybe an aura of being difficult sometimes, or only for the people that really know what's going on. It's for the specialists. It's like really good wine. You can only drink really good wine when you know everything about the grape, which is not true. I think everyone can enjoy really good wine, even if you don't even know if it's from France or from wherever. So that's the same thing with chamber music. I think with chamber music, you can go really deep and you can think about it a lot, but you can also just enjoy the music. So I wonder how you can help be the advocate for chamber music.
Well, I would say that listening to, say, a Beethoven string quartet versus a symphony, well, it's not simple, it's simpler in that you just have four voices you're listening to. So in a way, it's a better introduction you know, it's an easier way to latch onto the ideas than going straight into a symphony. So I would say for anyone who's intimidated by chamber music, it shouldn't be intimidating at all. I think it's a great way to begin.
And to this end, there's actually a specific benefit to having all of these performances available in really high quality video. Because I think all of us have been talking about the joy of communication. And I think so far we're often talking about that in the context of a rehearsal and what you say. But in a performance, right, the communication is in our body language and in our eyes. And, you know, especially with the social distancing, actually, we're required to depend more on these sort of physical cues where we are inviting of one another's company on stage. And I think that's something that, you know, can be incredibly entertaining to take part in as an observer. And it becomes more evident, I think, with these close camera angles, because you can see, you know, people giving each other, you know, looks and things. That's so, it doesn't matter what the piece is, you know, one can marvel at the level of close touch that's being experienced.
Yes, it's very often that that chamber music depends on trust you have in your colleagues, in the other musicians you're making music with. I remember doing an exercise with a string quartet where we just turned ourselves around and we played with our backs to each other, so we couldn't see, but we could sense when we would start and how we would breathe and what the tempo would be. I've always wondered how we could do this with an orchestra, and actually 5 seconds ago I just suddenly it dawned to me, we can just turn off the lights. We should try that once with the symphony orchestra. Just turn off the lights and see if we can actually breathe and time and play together. I think actually that might be very interesting exercise. So of all the things that we've been preparing this season, what are the highlights? What are the things that our audience can really look forward to listening and hearing and seeing you play?
We have so many things up right now that I'd want to recommend. It's really hard to pick one. But I don't know. I think there's a little bit of something for everyone, and it just depends on the individual. For me, this Mozart that we're working on this week is probably the highlight. Yeah.
So why Jenny? Why the Mozart? What's so special about the Mozart?
I just think it's like just a perfect piece, and I think it's one of his best things. I love it, of course, it's clarinet, but I've loved the group that we're working with, the individuals, and everyone's playing and how it's coming together. So that one I'm really excited for.
Well, Jenny, you mentioned the Brahms earlier, but just the idea of a clarinet quintet, it's such a special instrumentation because you have the really suave sound of the clarinet on this sort of string pillow. I mean, chamber music always sounds very inviting, but the Mozart and then the Brahms, which, you know, will, you know, come around on the VSO season soon, you know, is just that same warm feeling the whole time.
Yeah.
It's also what I always find is one of my favorite colors, the clarinet. But what I also very often see with composers is that at the end of their life, they start writing for clarinet, clarinet or viola, and I wonder why that is. I mean, somehow it comes across as a really personal voice for a lot of composers, and I think that's something. I think that's something that's actually it belongs to the clarinet. I think the clarinet is a sound is just a very beautiful way of speaking in a personal voice for a lot of composers. I think with Mozart and with Brahms, it's very obvious that this is the case. Of course, the cello sonatas are beautiful as well, and they can be very melancholic as well. But the and if Karina, is there something for you that was just an incredible highlight that you've been playing or that you're looking forward to start?
I've been looking forward to this Mozart, and I've actually been able to play this piece with all three of you guys. I played with Cassie back in the fall, and now I get to play with Jenny and Henry, and it's just such a treat. Last time I was on first, this time I was on second, and I don't mean to backstep, but I think the whole viola clarinet thing, if you notice the range, it's really easy for us as humans to sing in that range.
Yes.
And so it's
Yes.
easy to sing along and to
Yes.
really kind of internalize it.
Mhm.
And I think that's why these clarinet quintets are so enjoyable for all of us, because it really like settles into the soul and even in your vocal cords
Yes.
when you're hearing it. And yeah, the instrumentation, and I don't know, all of you guys are awesome. And so it brings me back to playing with Cassie in the fall. And then I've always wanted to play chamber music with Jenny. So yeah, I've really been enjoying it. And the Purcell was a challenge because I am not trained in Baroque violin. I only took one semester, and
so Karina, tell us what happened. So this was suites by Purcell, right?
Yes, and Nick Wright, his father Simon, actually arranged all of them because some of them are strictly for keyboard, and so he realized it for harpsichord and then a string quartet plus string quintet with a bass. And it was a challenge because Nick, when he sent us an email, he's like, I'm aiming for little to no vibrato, and as we all know, Baroque string playing doesn't mean no vibrato. It does mean less, but I was pretty committed to just trying to be expressive with the bow. You really have to rely on different swells instead of just so.
Did you use another bow, or did you use your normal bow?
We did not. No, I don't think any of us own Baroque bows. So that would have been another challenge. But sometimes even in Baroque, when you're using a modern bow, you just hold it up a little higher, and that kind of emulates that same lightness and different balance in the bow. We didn't do that. The challenging thing really is to rely on the voice of the bow. And as we play so much German romantic music, which really relies on that sound in the left hand, your vibrato, changing the, length and or the speed of your vibrato, and that also helps with intonation.
Well, vibrato covers up a lot of things, of course. Yes. It makes it beautiful and gorgeous and wonderful to listen to, but it also covers up. So when you stop using vibrato, you're naked, aren't you? I mean, that's. Yeah. And then you have to add something else, and I think that's what you're talking about with the bow.
Yes. Yeah. There was one movement, an aria, so it was voice, two violins, and viola. And some of those chords were, as an inner voice player, you really have to be mindful of your thirds. You can't just play what sounds in tune to you. Your major thirds need to be close to that bass. And
so this is probably good just to explain really quickly. So a major third is a distance of two notes, and the idea is that if you play two notes together, you have to adjust the intonation in relationship to the other notes. So that means if an E is a different E if you play the E together with a C, or if you play the E together with a B, for instance. So sorry to interrupt you, Karina, but I think that was maybe helpful for everyone who's listening.
Yes. Yeah. So that was a big challenge, but
that's the challenge of the inner voices. As an inner voice player, you have a lot of challenges that are not maybe obvious at first listening, but extremely important to get right, to make the entire sound be beautiful and in harmony. Exactly. So as playing a middle voice in chamber music, does that present different kind of challenges than playing in middle voices in the symphony orchestra?
Very similar. You have to be aware of your intonation almost more than a solo line, because it's easier to what's called like artistic intonation, where your leading tones, that pitch that's snug up to the tonic, that's easier to play sharper when you're playing a solo line.
Yeah.
If you do that as an inner voice, it's all going to sound out of whack.
Yes.
So similar stresses, symphonic and chamber inner voices, but being able to be that support and rub up against those the bass and then the melodic lines, it's very special because you have to be hyper aware of everyone and you have to kind of be very confident and try to chill out. It's a special place to be in a chamber group and in a symphony.
Yeah. And Henry, do you have some favorites you want to share with us?
Well, I think, my experience with chamber music this year, actually with the VSO, has been interesting, considering that I started in the midst of a pandemic. So I remember looking at about the time that I found out that I got the job with the VSO, they had released a schedule for what this year was sort of supposed to be.
Yes.
Right. And so I remember looking at what my first program was going to be. And my first program was supposed to be Sibelius Violin Concerto with James Ennis and then Strauss Ein Heldenleben, which of course are like two very, very big pieces. So of course, times change. I moved here, and on the same date, I was playing with James Ennis, but it was the Beethoven Septet, which is just about as far removed from Ein Heldenleben as you could imagine, right?
Yes.
So for me, actually, it's been neat because with the Beethoven Septet, and then the other piece that I've done on chamber music this year was the Mozart this week, though there was also the Martineau Revue de Cuisine, which is chamber music-esque. But with all of those, it's an opportunity to get to know not just the people around you, but actually my own role in the orchestra and my own sound. As a newcomer, you have to think a lot about how to fit in, when to stand out, how to suggest things either verbally or otherwise. And so I think actually as a result of that, you're thinking of particular favorites. I mean, the septet was just such a eye-opener for me because it was my first real time outside of trial weeks playing with VSO musicians, but it also, I was the only cellist. So having a real opportunity to try out these ideas with a very receptive group of people. So I think, the septet, the Mozart, and then all of these other pieces that have been brought up, I think for all of us, it's been a year of discovery, and I think that there are plenty of ways to try to look at the pandemic with silver linings. I think as far as orchestra playing goes, all of these new ways of listening and collaborating, I think are, without cliche, just real silver linings because we're listening so well now, and being part of that is really special.
Oh yes. Oh, I think that's one of the huge benefits of playing chamber music in general is that you can only do it when you listen extremely well to each other. And I mean, in the end, that's also true for playing in a symphony orchestra. You have to listen extremely well, and then beautiful things can happen. Wow, this is great. This is great to talk to all of you. I'm wondering if there are any questions from viewers and listeners. Maybe not. Maybe we've answered everything you wanted to know. But maybe there are some.
I will bring up one thing that this season has. So we've played more chamber music because we can have fewer musicians on stage. But we have to play spaced out, and it's such a strange thing for chamber music. We have to be 2 meters apart for strings, 3 meters for winds. Normally when you're playing chamber music, you're trying to sit as close together as possible. There's no space between you. And now we're really spread out, and it's changed, like Henry was saying, it's put such an emphasis on the physical communication, which, always is a component of chamber music, but it's more important. And then with the masks, like you just have the eyes, you don't even have the whole face, to read. So it's been eye-opening in a lot of ways. And I think we've grown quite a bit in figuring out how to handle the space, throughout this season. And I think that's going to translate really well when we get back as an orchestra. I think it's been a great learning experience for us. And it's made everyone an individual leader when you're playing a piece. You're not able to listen and follow, or you will be late every time. You have to be leading. Everyone's leading all the time.
So everyone in the orchestra has to be take more initiative. That's what
this
you mean?
Season for sure.
Yeah. Take initiative, trust each other really well, and be brave, because I mean, we're extremely lucky. We can play on the concerthall.ca, but of course at the same time we all know we're also presenting ourselves. Which is of course, we have to be very brave to do that. And I think you're all extremely brave of doing that. There are some questions. Now, one of the questions is, we've been talking about Beethoven and Mozart chamber music, but there are so many more chamber music composers. So the question actually is, who are some lesser known composers whose chamber music we should discover? So I wonder if you have any ideas. There's an incredible amount of chamber music. Yesterday, I listened to some Verdi, some chamber music of Verdi, and I never listened to that before in my life. It's gorgeous. It's amazing. So what are the things we can Geheimtipp? So that's a secret tip. What are the secret tips of chamber music?
Cassie, maybe you can talk about Caroline Shaw a little bit, since those just came up today.
Oh yeah, those are so incredible. I mean, it's so hard to answer this question because there are so many people who write chamber music who maybe aren't as famous as Beethoven and Mozart, right? But already I think our season includes like a lot of people who we as classical musicians might be familiar with, but I'm not sure if everyone in our audience would. Caroline Shaw is certainly really well known, but something I love about her music is, she writes vocal music as well, and I think that's really, really audible in her string writing. It's incredibly. Some people who I shared this music with when I was kind of just listening to this great recording that's out and getting excited about recording it, said to me that it sounded really vocal. It sometimes even sounds like breathing. There are some, for lack of a better word, extended techniques, sort of, a little bit outside the normal box that are just incredibly emotive and very much like, it's so easy to hear them and hear, sounds of human voices in them, like sighs and whispers. Some of her markings in her music are to play like fluttering wings. I mean, it's gorgeous, and it's incredibly poetic.
So she writes in the part play like fluttering wings.
Oh, her markings are so fun. Some of them are like, yeah, there's an end of a movement when we kind of just everything ascends and until we're making just these breathy kind of fluttery sounds with our bows. And she says like a flurry of fluttering wings or something like that. Sometimes her markings are like she's just talking to you really casually. I love when composers really put their personality into the indications. Yes. And that's what hers is like. I mean, it's so fun. It's so personal. And it's really clearly vocal, so it's easy to connect with. That's something that I've heard from everyone I've shared this music with. So Caroline Shaw's amazing for sure. I mean, I also played in the Schoenberg Chamber Symphony arrangement, which was, another one that I'm not sure if everyone in our audience is familiar. Sometimes Schoenberg gets a rep for being like a little bit inaccessible, which I think is a myth and totally untrue, and is incredibly romantic and incredibly beautiful writing. And so I think that's another one that people should look out for in the season. It's just so great. It's the kind of thing where you. Yeah, that's coming out. Is it coming out soon? Yeah, it's not out yet. But
I don't know. It's not out yet. Look for it.
Well, it's another great one. Just two that come to mind. But
yes, wonderful, gorgeous. Thank you, Karina and Henry. Do you have some secret tips?
Karina, do you want to go first, or should I?
I think you should go first, Yale.
No. I mean, there are a couple. As an American expat in Canada, there aren't too many opportunities to say, hey, whatever. But going to school in the U.S., there's definitely certain legacies of unheralded composers who, for whatever reasons, often political reasons, were not able to have their voices expressed. And one composer I've been listening to a lot is Florence Price, who was an African-American composer a long time ago, so early 1900s, who actually had a couple big works premiered. Like I think she had a symphony premiered by the Chicago Symphony or things, but was basically phased out by the powers that be for much of our parents' and our grandparents' lives, but has a tremendously vast and nuanced catalog of works for all sorts of different instrumentations, a lot of which has been recorded or is being recorded at this very moment, because there's been a real resurgence in interest in her music. So I would say for eagle-eyed or eagle-eared listeners, keeping an eye out for Florence Price's name on things is something. I mean, this is just, there's been a real renaissance with her work. So I felt I should bring that up.
That's great. Thank you, Henry. Wonderful. You want to add something, Karina?
I wish I knew more chamber music. I'm not gonna lie. I know when I was at Cleveland Institute of Music, they had a Neo competition, and I started to hear more of chamber music by him, and that's Milhaud. I think if you just look up that
Darius Milhaud, that's the French composer.
Yes.
Yeah. I think isn't there a trio? I think there's a string trio.
I don't know that one, but I know there's.
Or is it? Maybe it's even isn't it clarinet? Oh, it's a clarinet trio. It's a clarinet. It's a clarinet, violin, and piano, I think. No.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yes. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. There's another question here. Why do we play chamber music in smaller spaces? How does Piat Hall affect the performance? Well, of course, we have with chamber music, you don't need the huge hall to reach the audience. It can be in an intimate setting, but it doesn't mean it has to be in a smaller hall, or does it?
It doesn't have to be, but I will say that one of the things that we've gotten over the years, a comment that I get in almost every chamber players concert I play on, our audience loves being so close and being able to see. So you can see so much more of the performers than you can from the back of the Orpheum or even the front of the Orpheum. Honestly, you get to see our faces, our expressions, how we communicate with each other. And that's the communication between musicians. Being able to see that up close and personal is really special and adds a lot.
And of course, on the concerthall.ca, we have that also, because the camera comes really close.
Yeah.
I want to jump in because I keep thinking of one of my favorite moments. It's like, okay, so remember when we played Beethoven 6 last spring? It was it was a year ago.
A year ago.
So the camera was really fun in that, and there's this moment where in the last movement, which like I think I always get really emotional when I play that symphony from beginning to end because of the whole journey. But I was sitting with Karina, and right next to us was Kimi. And I don't know if you remember this, Karina, but I like loved it so much I screenshotted it. We were playing The Second Violins Get the Theme, which is so gorgeous. And we're playing it, and we don't know that this is happening, but all three of us smile at the same time. And the camera caught it. And like, the great thing about chamber music is like you get to see that close up. You know, you don't need the camera to swoop in, but like it's still happening in the symphony too. It's easier to see you in a smaller space when we play chamber music. Anyway, I just have that great memory. It's like it was the last time we all played close together. So it's just like really special.
Right. Okay, so let's see. I don't think there are any more questions. Well, it's been wonderful to chat, and I'm so happy we get the chance as a symphony orchestra to focus on chamber music. My wish is that we keep doing that chamber music, the way we've discovered it this year, forced by something, is actually, it turned out to be, as you said, Henry, one of the silver linings, and a real one, a true one. So my wish is that we keep it as an important part of what we do, and I'm sure our audiences are looking forward to hear all the big stuff again. But I think there are also many people that really appreciate all the other things that we now suddenly also show and bring to our audiences. So thank you for doing that this season. Keep on doing that. And I'm looking forward to all the great things that will be presented on YouTube, on Facebook, and on theconcerthall.ca. Thank you so much for this chat. See you very soon.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.